I don't know that I would say was a conscious choice unless you're using the term tech very broadly speaking. My actual formal training is as an engineer. And so I would have started my professional career as an electrical engineer, which I did my undergraduate at UWI in Trinidad, and then started at, I believe, JPS on graduation, subsequently telephone company as a telecommunications engineer. So that my sort of first, I would say, mainstream job on tech as we think of it, information technology, would have been when so I went to do my master's in the Netherlands, did a master's in electronics engineering. But when I came back after a couple of years at the telephone company, then I joined the team at Alcan, Jamaica. And so that would have been my sort of first sort of opportunity, I would say, one that came to me through Professor Bonnet Duggan and a great team of persons there at Alcan. And I spent quite a few years there in tech, if you want to use the term tech, as against sort of mainstream engineering. So that would have been my first entry into tech in the enterprise, so to speak. So I spent quite a few years at Alcan, maybe 5-6 years. I subsequently went to JPS, Jamaica Public Service Company, in the 90s as the CIO. So I would have spent the better part of, let's say, maybe 15 years at JPS as the CIO. I suppose in a senior level position, that's where you have the biggest opportunities to have your triumphs and your challenges and of course mistakes. I would say lessons learned about the importance of strong collaboration between IT and the business side of the organization would have been one of the strongest lessons learned. I think a term that I took from I would consider my mentor, Professor Duggan, has to do with the idea of user ownership. And so that would be a big part of my early lessons learned and how to engage with the business side of the organization and have them not just see IT as a service, but as a partner. I think that would have been an important lesson. That has been with me throughout my entire career, both in industry and in academia. All right, so the first one I'll mention is something that I live by and I apply it in life, not only in business, but just in the way that I process things. I think of life as a series of decision points connected by straight lines. And perhaps that has something to do with my postgraduate training as a decision scientist. But I believe that one's life trajectory really is anchored around key decisions that you make. And so those decisions, and you have big decisions and you have small ones, right? So choosing to go and do my PhD when I was perhaps at the height of my professional career was a big decision and a life-changing one. And there are other such decisions. So I think that's one of the enduring things I would say in terms of a philosophy that I have practiced throughout. Another one, I think I would have mentioned it earlier, the whole idea, certainly within the enterprise and within the larger national context, that technology is an enabler. And so in the enterprise, when I think of technology and the business, I'm very much anchored around the notion that technology has to enable and it has to serve the business. And so this becomes very much a collaboration. And the whole idea of user ownership and is something that I not only practice, but I preach in my classes here and in my lectures about the way one engineers business systems within the business IT systems within the organization. So I think that that's quite important. What other enduring philosophies? I suppose the others would have more of a spiritual nature, perhaps. And maybe that becomes a very different conversation. But and those are the ones that spring to mind, Kimiko. Okay, so I made the decision to go into academia full time, maybe about 12, 13 years ago, having spent the better part of my career in industry. And so I've been at the Mona School of Business and Management in this capacity since then. It has really been quite rewarding. It has given me the opportunity to bring to bear much of what I've gained from practice, from industry, and to apply that and to not only apply, but to enrich that with a perspective that comes from academia. And for me, the value of that is being able to impart, for one, in the classroom, a kind of understanding of both domains, right? So that information systems and business information systems, as I've said a couple of times, really works best when you have a strong collaboration between business and IT. I believe that my practitioner experience and my academic perspective puts me in the best position to impart that well. So that I think of myself as not purely an academic, but more so as what we have dubbed a pracademic. So a pracademic being, let's say, a practitioner who's dabbling in academia, or you could say I'm an academic who is very much schooled in the real world, and so I bring a kind of practical perspective to the discourse. So I would say that's one of the things that I consider quite important about my current tenure here and what I'm able to do and to impart in the classroom and the real world perspective that I bring. Besides that, I do have the opportunity and the privilege to get involved in research that I consider not only impactful, but also practical. So I've never been driven by the idea of doing research just to publish papers, but looking at research as something that should be impactful and relevant to our context. Yeah, so I mean, digital in its broadest sense has really become our reality. And I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has served to accelerate that reality. But the truth is, the onset of digital, what we refer to as a digital economy, and the fact that the majority of our interactions, whether it's commercial, social, economic interactions, are now taking place in the digital domain. So really, COVID has only served to accelerate that trend. And so for our citizens in Jamaica and the Caribbean writ large, being digitally functional, being digitally literate, being digitally proficient is incredibly important to us being not only competitive as individuals in today's world, but also competitive as our collective societies in our countries that have to compete in the digital economy. So there are a number of projects research projects that I'm involved in that I think are quite important in making our own small contribution to facilitating and advancing digital literacy at all levels, not just our youth, and in particular, what we refer to as marginalized youth, but also within the enterprise, and again, looking at the larger societal context. So let me talk a little bit about a couple of those. So perhaps the most significant initiative that I'm involved in that touches on this realm is the Caribbean School of Data. It is an initiative that we started, the Mono School of Business and Management, as part of a larger partnership. It's a regional initiative, and it's one that we're focused on. How do we address the deficits in digital literacy that exist in the Caribbean, not just Jamaica? So this is a regional initiative. There's a report out of the GSMA that looks at digital inclusion in Latin America and the Caribbean, but the Caribbean in particular, but it identifies the lack of digital literacy and skills as one of the biggest barriers to digital inclusion in our region and in our context. And I think the most recent World Bank World Development Report makes the same assertion. So one of the most important things that we can do is to focus on building digital capabilities at the level of individuals, at the level of our organizations and our enterprises, and at the level of society, broadly speaking. So that's kind of the mission of the Caribbean School of Data. We've had the benefit of funding from big partners, beginning with Google, that's funding the regional initiative, and then in Jamaica, working with Flow as part of a digital inclusion program. So I think that is quite important work. And even though we started out initially with an emphasis on youth digital competencies, because of the nature of the program and the funding, it really has opened itself up to persons across all demographics. So young people, middle-aged people, I'm particularly proud of the seniors that have become involved in this program. People that run the educational spectrum to having just graduated from high school, to persons with university degrees who still perceive the importance of digital literacy. There's a very strong gender bias towards females, which I find quite interesting. Nearly 70% of the persons that come into the program are females. And that's, looking at the demographics is quite fascinating for me. But, that's one of the most important things I think that I've been involved in, and that program continues. Other related initiative to that is one that we're doing with in collaboration with the Broadcasting Commission and UNESCO, which is now looking at digital media and information literacy in national levels. So how do we develop the kind of framework? The acronym we use for this is DMIL, Digital Media and Information Literacy. But how do we develop the kind of framework that ensures that this becomes embedded in our primary and secondary educational systems, that it becomes something that can enable our organizations and our critical industry sectors, such as the global services sector and others, to have the kind of workforce and to be able to recruit the kind of talent from the labor markets that is digitally proficient. And that's a big initiative. That's not that's not an overnight project, but it's quite important. So when I think of those two undertakings, they cover the spectrum from focusing on the digital competencies of the individual, and then looking at building a society that is digitally competitive. I would say those are two of the more important research-funded initiatives that we're involved in, Kimiko. Okay. My impact. I ultimately, others will be the judge of what that impact is. As I mentioned, a number of the things that I'm currently involved in, both in the classroom and as part of a research agenda that is fairly broad-based, not only at a national level, but at a regional level. My hope is that ultimately that will impact individuals or society and our region to really become much more competitive. Having had the opportunity to travel quite extensively and live in other parts of the world, in North America, in Europe, I am truly seized on the notion that we're privileged to live in the Caribbean. I think that there are things that, since we are referred to still as small island developing states, there are things that we can do to enhance the quality of that existence. I believe since that as economies, as countries, as a region, we don't necessarily have all of the physical assets that others might have, but we have intellectual assets, we have cultural assets. And I believe digital is an enormous enabler for us to be able to exploit many of those assets. And so if I can make a small contribution through a number of the programs that I've mentioned to help to build that digital capability, again, at the level of individuals or collectively within the enterprise, or more broadly speaking, at the level of our societies or as a region, then I think that I would be satisfied. Let me put it that way. But there's still lots of time to have that kind of impact. In the age of digital, there's no such thing as retirement, right? One of the things that I enjoy looking at is my mother, who is celebrated her 89th birthday a few weeks ago, and she has become digital. We communicate. She has a tablet and spent all her life as a teacher and never had to use a computer. But like many of the seniors that I see getting involved in the Caribbean School of Data, she is now digitally active. And I mean, that's a single case, but a quite rewarding one. And if we can expand that and scale that kind of impact across all aspects of our society and region, then I think, Kimiko, I would be satisfied.